When we talk about critical philosophy, the first name that comes into our mind is Immanuel Kant. But why is that so? In this video, we will study the critical philosophy of Kant, the forms of sensibility, and the nature of synthetic a priori judgments. As you would know, there are two major schools of philosophy. One is rationalism, the second is empiricism, and now let's start. Kant did not reject empiricism and rationalism outrightly. He tried to retain all that appeared valuable in them. His statement was that both empiricism and rationalism are right in what they affirm, but they are wrong in what they deny. Empiricism affirms that knowledge is constituted via experience. On the other hand is rationalism, which affirms that knowledge is constituted by innate or a priori ideas. Empiricism is right in as much as it points out that propositions of facts can be derived from experience. And on the other hand again is rationalism, which says that knowledge is constituted of a priori elements also. Again, empiricism is wrong in as much as it denies the presence of prior elements involved in knowledge. In a similar way, rationalism is wrong because it denies that sense experience also constitutes knowledge. So now we have seen that how is rationalism and empiricism right in what they affirm and how they are wrong in what they deny. Now, according to Kant, the proper view is that knowledge begins with experience, but it does not necessarily originate from it. That is, it does not necessarily originate from experience. As soon as sense experience registers its impressions on the mind at once is stirred into its own activity and contributes its own ordering activity into discrete impressions. The ordering activity is discharged by prior elements. According to Kant, knowledge is a joint virtue of sense and understanding. But mind does not remain satisfied with the scientific knowledge of the phenomena only. It also tries to know the suprasensible, and that is not possible. Now, according to Kant, apart from the sense and the understanding, there is reason which tries to constitute knowledge. However, the idea of reason is not constitutive, but it is regulative. That means it regulates the principles of knowledge. Therefore, according to Kant, knowledge begins with sense, then it proceeds to understanding, and finally it ends in reason. So, the reason why we call Kant's philosophy as critical philosophy is because of the sense that he goes beyond any dogmatic systems insofar as it attempts to reach principles which are a priori not only to a particular controversy but to all controversies. The inquiry of Kant is almost exclusively concerned with a priori contributions of mind. The subject of the present inquiry is the questions: how much can we hope to achieve via reason when all the materials and assistance of experience is taken away? The next topic is the forms of sensibility. Now, according to Kant, whenever we perceive any object, we perceive it in a particular space and time. In the absence of this space and time, nothing can be perceived. In other words, this basically means that the two forms of space and time are present in every perception. Now, it is important to note that they are not the forms of stimuli themselves, and therefore it must be admitted that mind has a faculty by which these forms are given to perceptions. It should be remembered that, like Hume, Kant also admits of space and time and says that space and time are not subject to experience. We do not have any sensation of space and time is what he says. Hume absolutely denies the existence of space and time because they are not perceived. Kant, on the other hand, considers them due to mind's faculty of sensibility. According to this view, the mind is active in the process of knowledge is what Kant says. Now moving to the synthetic a priori judgments in metaphysics. So Kant was most anxious to show that there are a priori elements in knowledge which are not derived from experience and yet they help in increasing the empirical knowledge. This is the real meaning of the synthetic judgments which are a priori. That is, according to Kant, these are objects which increase our knowledge without being empirical. In other words, we can say that they are universal, necessary cognitions without being analytic. However, the central point of Kant lies that a priori elements serve to increase the empirical knowledge. So some elements in knowledge have to be derived from experience. But this particular condition is not observed in metaphysics, is what is believed by Kant. He says, in metaphysics, we deal with supersensible entities like the immortal self, the cosmos, the spirit, the God, etc. So none of these objects can be experienced. So the principle of a priori judgments are not applicable to metaphysics, or we can say that the a priori principles are not applicable to supersensible entities like the mortal self, the God, etc. Therefore, according to Kant, metaphysics as a science is not possible. He says, the attempt at extending knowledge with the help of priori elements alone without the reference to empirical objects lands us nowhere. This nowhere is defined by Kant as hopeless illusion. However, though we realize that the hopeless illusion or the illusionary nature of the metaphysical objects, we can never completely shake them off. Hence, metaphysics, according to Kant, is not a science. In other words, he says, metaphysics is supported by a natural disposition in man. Question: whose philosophy is known as critical philosophy? The correct answer is Kant. The reason behind this is that there has been a long debate between rationalism and empiricism, and this was also present during the time of Kant, and Kant came up with a very novel idea by which he said that rationalism and empiricism are right in what they affirm, but at the same time they are wrong in what they deny. And he says knowledge begins with experience but does not necessarily originate from it. And lastly, he defines knowledge that knowledge is something which begins with sense, it proceeds to understanding, and it finally ends in reason.